to refer back to the anniversary, and like, the Kennedy assassination is often talked about as this kind of like primal violation of like the America's like self-confidence and self-image. And like, look, it was all pretty rotten before Kennedy, but like more than that, I think it's like the first in this like a long process of like these huge public events that take place that nobody really believes the official account of, but like but we have no alternative otherwise. Like they go on unresolved, unpunished. Like it's just they just continue on. And I think it just leads to this sense that, like, articulated or not, that we're just like not a real country. Like, I mean, this is the feeling that I had like after the Iraq war, that like nobody involved in planning or doing that fucking atrocity has been punished at all. It's just like, how do you believe that you live in a real country that you're a citizen of when like these things can keep happening over and over again, but without any compelling resolution or consequences for any of the people involved in it?
Yeah, there was one guy who went to jail for related to the Bush Cheney CIA torture, and that was John Kiriakou, a friend of mine who's helping me with the podcast now. And so he went to jail for exposing it. Okay, those are the only people who do get punished. So yeah, it's a lawless. At the top, there is lawlessness, and it's been institutionalized. It's like Carl Schmitt wrote, "Sovereign is he who decides the exception. The exception is the exception to the rule of law." And the national security state has assumed that role, and it is shrouded in state secrecy. So we don't even know when they are asserting it and how they are asserting it. They use their own techniques of the clandestine arts to perpetrate political violence with plausible deniability. And it has carried over, as you allude to, these things that we never get to the bottom of. Peter Dale Scott calls these deep events, and the really important ones, he calls them structural deep events, meaning that they have the power to alter, political history and politics in the U.S., and that they invariably increase the level of government secrecy in the system. And so these deep events, these structural deep events, they're dismissed by the mainstream as conspiracy theory. But, a lot of the prevailing liberal ideologies are that the rule of law prevails, and that democracy is a real thing, and that, we are a country where the public is sovereign, and so on and so forth. But, the Kennedy assassination is a perfect example, because you can see, not only do you see the president get killed in a way that where the state's narrative of it is absurd, but his brother is the top lawman in the country and makes the assessment that he is powerless to do anything about it unless he becomes president. And on his way to becoming president, he gets shot in the back of the head at point blank range by a guy who's 6 feet in front of him. So these are things that we have to deal with. But the problem is, if you start to like actually think of like what this means, it narrows it's a challenge to most people's political perspectives. You're going to be outside of the mainstream if you start saying these things all the time, because even if people are vaguely, I don't believe the Warren Commission, support for that fell for 8% to 8% after they showed the Zapruder film on TV. And yet, what can you do about it? It's a conundrum.
It's not just like, maybe alienates you from mainstream politics, but I mean, it narrows your very idea of like what politics is. Because if you can know about all these things more or less openly and discuss them on podcasts or make movies about them, but the fictions themselves like are unaltered, or like the principles involved in it are undisturbed entirely because of the things you talked about, because of these secret laws and secret power that they've spent decades accruing for themselves. And it's just sort of like, you're not really living in a country. You're not really living like in a democratic society.
No, and it's Sheldon Wolin, he didn't get into the details of specific state crimes, but he called it inverted totalitarianism, because totalitarianism just meant, there was no element of civil society that could act as to counterbalance the power of the regime, except that instead of like it being like Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union, this totalitarianism sort of disengages people and disempowers them rather than like rallying them to like the cause or whatever. And so that's sort of the situation that we're in. I'd like to see the rise of a Marxist, materialist, because these people running things are obviously people with a lot of the money and power. That's not that hard to figure out. and they run the security apparatus, which by definition conspires all the time. Like they have people like operations and plans, and like, what is that? They're secret, illegal, violent things carried out by people, which is the definition of a conspiracy, right? So we have state-sanctioned conspiracies that are institutionalized and ongoing, like the operations arm of the CIA. So, but on behalf of capital. So not to be like a Bircher or a QAnon nutter who thinks it's like, oh yeah, they're all conspiring so that they can go into the pizza place with their pedophile ring. You know, that's not really logical. It's one of people that own everything. That's the position you want to be in, and that's what this national security state, you know, it serves to bring about.
I think the problem for a Marxist attempt to like assimilate the reality of the deep state, the reality of this structure into their narrative is that at the end of the day, you are telling a narrative about people and about choices made, conspiracies made by people in power. And when you're doing that, people want a motive. They want to understand why are they doing this, right? And to maintain power doesn't really work for a lot of people because, that they believe the thing that these powerful people are making is a society that is increasingly anti-human, like at a basic level. It's destroying the planet. It's destroying social cohesion. It's destroying what it is to be a human. And what person, even if they're rich, would want to do that? And so that's why it's very difficult for conspiracy emphasizing narratives not to end up having to have some end state, a villain that is somehow human but not human, like a reptile or an alien or a member of a certain religious and ethnic group that has that has values that are not human values. And the thing is that you don't really need that because capitalism is a algorithm that is inhuman, and that people, even at the very top, they might be benefiting from it, and they might carry out conspiracies to perpetuate its domination, but they are fundamentally, at the end of the day, not in control of it. Like, there are no people at the top of this thing. There is only this algorithm. There's only the value form, and there is profit extraction. And that is hard to pitch to regular people narratively. It's not as satisfying as the idea of cabals and the idea of people who are somehow not us doing things to us, instead of really everybody along for the ride in a certain respect, being pulled towards total annihilation of life without anybody in the system, even those behind closed doors making these plans, really wanting that to be the case.
Yeah, it's frightening to think about these. It's not just capitalism, it's civilization. There are people, civilization is hierarchical, and the people at the top enjoy more power and wealth because of exploitation, this dynamic of exploitation. And you have myths to rationalize it. We all have things that we do to rationalize our position in our own mind, where I need a new PlayStation game. Starving kids in Africa could maybe, be helped by $2 a day, but I'm going to buy a PlayStation game, right? We all have these things that we do that are to rationalize our own position and some of the things that we enjoy. And if you try to extrapolate what it's like for these elites that, do have their hands on the levers of power, and I think it's it's a rotating class, and some of the people that do the worst things are really more the servants of the money power itself, the people with all the money. But it's a human thing to detach from worrying about some of these more serious things, because if you did, you'd be so depressed to think about the genocide on the area where you're standing right now today, or where you're living today. And if you thought about that all the time, you couldn't function. And these elites are probably more in that direction than anybody else. The people that said, like, okay, Indonesia, huge gold mine in West Papua, biggest gold mine in the world. Sukarno wants to give it to the communists. This is a problem. We'll stage this provocation with these generals, and in the aftermath of that, we're going to have them kill the communists. They just murder 1 million to 2 million, 3 million. And it's just like, To them, it's a way to like solve these problems of power that they're faced with. And it's not that regular people do this thing on anywhere near that magnitude, but there is civilization. It kind of allows you to, and it forces you to accept a certain amount of brutality and exploitation that comes with your position.
I think that's kind of the point of in the last 30 years, the last 30, 40 years, the mushrooming of the national security state is, I mean, I think one of the unique features of it is that it always has to keep rolling. It always has to keep growing. It always has to keep expanding. I always liked what Michael Parenti said about gangster capitalism, and he has an amazing lecture on this as it relates to JFK. But I would almost call the last 40 years pillhead capitalism. There always has to be a new scam. There always has to be a new thing. You have to new bit of copper you have to strip. You have to keep it going, or else you go into withdrawals and you die. But I think since the 80s, and especially since 9/11, as the security state has exploded, and especially the contractor state after 9/11, the people that helped turn Virginia blue, the function of that, beyond just needing to always get bigger and gain momentum, is so there aren't as many single individuals who this will weigh so heavily on. Someone who is a cog in this machine can go, oh, well, like what we did here was bad, but I work on the fucking Malaysia desk. All I do is Malaysia shit. All I do is support for the CIA hit teams that we have in Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's a way so that no individual player is that important. Anyone who proves themselves, or stays in it long enough, shows themselves to be a true believer, a true servant of Satan, in the mold of an Angleton or someone, they get to go up there, they get to carry more of that evil on their back. But for the people who are just they're middle class people going in and out, the point is that they're not carrying that much, and they do not have to think about it that much, I think.
Yeah, they keep us that way. Don't worry yourself about it. It's like the Jack Nicholson monologue in A Few Good Men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't want to know.
You don't want the truth because deep down in places you don't talk about at parties, you want me on that wall.
That is the attitude that they have for us, and it's true for a lot of people, especially liberals. They can't deal with this. They're kind of the pivotal class, and I'm glad you guys have had Catherine Liu on here in the past, because her writing on this like PMC mentality there's a different version of it that prevails at the national security state, although they're blending now with like those woke CIA ads and things.
Oh, those are great.
I love those.
It's really wild the way that they try to legitimate and obscure, their what's going on.
Just like last question for me here. Like, I don't know, like in thinking about the Kennedy assassination is just like all just sort of like all implications, all sort of grand narratives about what this implies aside, is still technically an unsolved murder. Do you think it's useful in that context to think about the CIA as basically the history's grandest and still most ongoing criminal conspiracy?
Yes. I think that no gang of criminals has ever had the impact on world historic events that they have, shaping, the destinies of Congo, Indonesia, Brazil, just as the transition from Kennedy to Johnson, for example, but like, Iranian history in the Middle East. And of course, but the bigger thing is the national security state, this colossus. But the CIA is involved in the worst parts of it. And I actually think that if you were to, for the elites in America, as this thing is kind of crumbling, it would be in their enlightened self-interest to allow some of these facts to be brought above board, because they've sort of created a situation that is volatile for them, and it's leading to crises that are not going to leave them untouched, perhaps. And so some sort of change that would be dramatic would be like acknowledging what happened with the Kennedy assassination. I think that could lead to a breakthrough in terms of our consciousness, and maybe something like that could help.
I think they're trying to do that, but I think it's very telling that a couple months ago that they were just like, oh, here's the documents, UFOs are real. Hey, bye everybody, have a good weekend. And then Biden last week is just saying, "Oh, we can't release any more of these Kennedy documents because they present some sort of unidentifiable harm to national security and intelligence gathering."
Right. Yeah, he was not going to release those. I wasn't too shocked about it. I would also be shocked, even though it's silly at this point and pointless. Gavin Newsom and releasing Sirhan, I bet he doesn't. I bet he ignores the law and the advice of the parole board, and I bet I would put money on him keeping Sirhan in jail too, because that seems
It's okay.
to be the mentality.
It's okay because Hinckley's out and he's in the stew right now, laying down tracks.
Yeah, he's still out. He's out there singing his songs. I can't believe that he's on Twitter tweeting about these things. He seems like a MK Ultra case or something. I mean,
he was like the son of a close family friend of the Bush family.
Yeah. I know the guy he had dinner with.
The Hinckleys
Bush, right?
and the Bushes go back in Texas to like the 1950s, I think.
Yeah, he was part of, as I understand it, he and Mark David Chapman both worked. This gets into like the weeds of alternative history, but they both worked for World Vision, which was the CIA.
It's this weird ministry, this weird CIA like funded World Christian Ministry. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a strange coincidence. And didn't they both whip out Catcher in the Rye after, or have it on their possession? There's some other weird angle there. So it's just like this, it sounds so nutty to even talk about it, but this is the kind of things that they do. There was a CIA officer, part of the Artichoke or MK Ultra project. He tried these techniques on his secretary, and it actually worked. His secretary picked up a gun and attempted to shoot. It was unloaded, but attempted to shoot someone that they've been working on. So if they want to get rid of anybody, it's very easy to do, I think.
Well, I think what I learned from the culmination of this conversation is, if we ever want to do anything about that, step one: begin the process of owning everything important in the world. So start buying up now. Start buying up all the land, resources, and and control of the U.S. dollar as global reserve currency. If we can get a handle on that, maybe we can pry back some of this stuff.
That's where crypto comes in.
I something I've been doing that's been kind of intelligent is I've been accruing US dollars, as anyone should, but I've also been flushing money down the toilet to decrease the M2 money supply, so my dollar's worth more.